Hello, everybody. Welcome to your very favorite Bronze Age comic book podcast, Flea Market Fantasy. I am your co-host, Mike L., and as always, I'm joined by
Michael Dell of the LCS Hockey Radio Show.
That's right, and we have a very special guest this week. Would you like to introduce the Mike Dell?
Yes, he's making... I don't even know how many times he's been on the show now.
6? I don't know.
I remember he was on for that dopey Doctor Who episode, where you picked Doctor Who.
A solid one, yeah.
And then Conan and Thor, What If? I remember that one.
Batman.
Oh, yeah, that Batman Michael Golden drew. Yeah. So he's a recurring guest. I think there was one other one, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was recently. What was it?
G.I. Joe.
Oh yeah.
That's right.
And then I think there was that Vampire versus the Werewolf one that was a lot.
Oh, that's right.
That's right.
Werewolf by Night. Yeah.
Right.
All right. So you hear his voice already. It's my bestest writing chum, a 3-time winner of the Best Independent Book Award for his novels Cage Life, Knuckle Down, Sinner's Cross, all available at Amazon.com or 19books.com. Miles Watson.
Thanks for having me back. I know you must be desperate.
Well, I always like when people volunteer to come on the show, and you're like, hey, I'd like to do that show again. So, yeah. Come on. Now, Miles, we've been talking for a while about doing a Fantastic Four. You wanted to do Fantastic Four 212 because I think it was one you had as a kid, right, that you really enjoyed. But today we're going to do Fantastic Four 213 just because I wanted to make it as difficult as possible for you. But because you were excited about 212 because you're like, oh, the Sphinx and Galactus fight. But when I looked at the issue, like it's basically just setting the table for their fight. Here in issue 213 is when they really fight.
If you look at the cover of 212, it says Clash of the Titans, and it's Sphinx and Galactus fighting as the disheveled, aged Fantastic Four are basically dying in the foreground. So I had mistakenly thought that this was the comic in which they fight, because as Mike L. will soon point out when he discusses the cover, on 213, the cover is of something different, which is funny because that's where the actual Galactus Sphinx fight takes place, and that's not on the cover of 213, so I was thrown by that.
Yeah, so was Mike L. last week when I picked the issue. He's like, are you sure this is the right one? I'm like, yeah, that's the right one. Yeah, they actually fight.
And I have 212 in front of me in paper version, the original version, right now, and it is very deceptive.
So, so I take it you were a big Fantastic... I should say this book came out in December of 1979, I believe. So how old were you then? Like
November,
you were like
November
30?
212 and December 213.
You were about 30 years old, I think, at that time?
I am I'm young. I'm not going to say my age. I'm young.
You were very young at the time. So do you remember purchasing these Fantastic Four books like on the newsstand as a kid? Or you said your brother collected too. Were they your brothers? This was
the exact time, actually, when my brother was still the dominant buyer, but I was starting to buy my own. And I had certain characters that were my favorite, especially in the Marvel universe. And Fantastic Four, especially the Thing, were some of my favorite characters in the Marvel universe. And I was following this plot very, very closely. And this had a long build-up. This story arc had a very long build-up over a number of issues. And so I vividly remember actually that agonizing wait, because when you're a kid, a month is like a year.
Right.
Yes.
And so people in the age of binge watching do not understand what it means to have to have waited, month to month to get a magazine, because it not only as a kid is your time sense different, but the actual speed at which these comics hit the rack bore no relation to what was on the cover, as I'm sure most collectors of Bronze Age comics know. You didn't know when these comics were going to show up. It might be 6 weeks before the local drugstore got them. So, yes, I do remember the revolving rack at People's Drug or whatever it was. Picking this bad boy up.
I was never really into the Fantastic Four much as a kid. Mike L., did you buy a lot of Fantastic Four?
Not as a little kid, but when I did finally start buying issues, it was around when the Thing mutated again, became like a giant pineapple.
Yeah.
And then remember there was the second Ms. Marvel. She joined the team. She was like a wrestler, and then she became the female thing. That's when I was buying it.
Okay. That was like late 80s, I think.
Yeah, late 80s.
Yeah. So, Miles, have you seen... by the way, I just got Disney Plus recently, and I've been watching a lot of Marvel stuff on there, and I see that they have all the Fantastic Four movies. Miles, have you watched any of the Fantastic Four films over the years?
I watched, against my better judgment, I watched that first one with Michael Chiklis and Jessica Alba, and that was so bad that I stopped halfway through, and then I was like, you know what? I borrowed it from a buddy of mine, and I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna watch it. So I watched it, but it was with that sense of horror that you have when you're watching something that you know has been so badly mishandled from the first frame that you're just sitting there going, wow, it's like they tried to make a bad movie. I mean, it sucked. It was
well, I hate to tell you this, Miles, but that movie's vastly superior to every other Fantastic Four movie. So it's like,
like the newest one was unwatchable, garbage. 2015 one or whatever. Ugh.
Yeah, I think it peaked with Chiklis.
Where they cast. Was that the one where they cast? Was it Michael Johnson? Michael B. Johnson is
Michael B.
Johnny
George or whatever his name is. Yes, that's the one. Yeah, Jessica. No, yeah, and then the rest
that was a Mara. That was a Kate Mara, right? Kate Mara.
Yes. That was terrible, unwatchable.
Why? I don't understand why that why they can make. And I know that there's several cleavages within the MCU where they couldn't do X-Men simultaneously with it's a different path than the Avengers stuff and all that, and the Fantastic Four, I guess, is yet another cleavage. I'm not really up on that, but I don't understand why they couldn't make those movies at least passable. There's there's no intrinsic challenge to the Fantastic Four that doesn't exist in any other comic book movie.
Right.
Mike,
look at the Pixar film Incredibles. That's basically Fantastic Four, right? And they did it right.
Right. Excellent point. And yes, and that is it's an odd family. It's like a cantankerous family. You've got the Thing squabbling with Johnny Storm, and Reed is like the patriarch, and he's got this sort of unrealistically hot wife, and it's funny. I mean, it's built in. There's this built-in dynamic there that really works, and for some reason they make these abominations of films, and I just don't understand.
Michael, what's the deal with the Fantastic Four rights? Are they under Marvel now?
Well, now Marvel, Disney basically was like, F this. They bought 20th Century Fox. So now they own X-Men and Fantastic Four again. And it's funny because Marvel went through the trouble of figuring out their Phase 5 with like WandaVision and Falcon and the Snowman and all that other stuff, like 10 other shows. And then they got the rights to X-Men and Fantastic Four. So they said, yes, we are going to reboot them and bring them back, but it's going to be a while because we've still got to go through Phase 5. So it's going to be a couple years.
All right, but you said Falcon and the Snowman. Is that a legit name?
Or sorry, Falcon and Winter Soldier. That's what I meant to say. Yeah.
I was going to say, wait, are they putting Falcon and Iceman together?
No, Falcon and the Snowman is a Sean Penn movie.
Yes.
I always mix those up. Right.
Yeah, not a Coke dealer. I was kind of surprised to hear that the Coke dealer had become a Marvel character.
Marvel superhero.
So, but in a couple years, we will be getting a Marvel movie with Fantastic Four, the same
and X-Men, yeah.
Well, that'll be pretty good. Now, we've mentioned this before, but I think if they do a Fantastic Four movie, they need to set it in like the 60s or the 50s, right? Like make it old school. Like
I personally agree, 60s, yeah, for sure.
It'd the early days of sci-fi and stuff. Put it back there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It would suit
don't they? I mean, not to digress too far, but I think Spider-Man is another example of the the Marvel fractures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right. And Sony won't budge. So.
Yeah. So, Michael, Sony's still clinging to Spider-Man?
Yeah, they're loaning him out to Marvel, but they're pretty much renegotiating every few movies, right? Like it almost happened last year where the deal almost fell through, and they for like 2 days. Remember, everyone was in a panic because Sony pulled out of the deal, but now they're back, so it's all good now.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so let's get back to the Fantastic Four 213 from 1979. Miles, would you like we mentioned, Sphinx is fighting Galactus. Since you were a fan of the first, 211 and 212 are really the issues that lead into this. Although, like I said, there was a long storyline leading up to this. Would you like to set the stage for where we are when this book opens?
Sure. Briefly, just very briefly, what's happening here is that the Sphinx, who's sort of a minor villain, goes on this quest.
Oh, let me just interrupt you right there, Miles. Yeah. Because a couple months ago, we actually had the first issue of the Sphinx, his first appearance. We actually did it on the show. I'm sure you heard it because you're a loyal listener of Flea Market Fans. But for all those loyal fans out there, you may remember Nova issue 6 is where Sphinx first appeared. Nova issue 6. And we discussed it, so just so everyone remembers, that's who we're talking about here, the Sphinx from that Nova issue. All right, go ahead, Miles.
Well, the Sphinx is one of these tormented characters that 5,000 years ago in Egypt, he discovered the Ka stone, which gave him all this power, but it also cursed him, I guess, to be immortal, which he didn't want to be.
Yeah.
And he essentially went on a quest, I believe, to die. He wanted to find a way to end his existence. And he absorbed enough power that he goes insane with the power that he gets. He basically becomes drunk on power and becomes a giant. He goes on this quest to become super powerful, and he achieves it.
Yeah, I think he went to the planet of Xandar, which is where the Nova alien came from that gave Nova his powers. And they have like a living computer planet, and he absorbed all the knowledge from that living computer. And that's how he grew and became real powerful.
Yes, in the long build-up to this, I don't have that one anymore, but I remember it. He goes to a great deal of trouble to become sort of immensely powerful. And then he shifts his agenda a little bit. He wants to claim the Earth for himself. And Galactus has those outriders, those
heralds.
Heralds.
The heralds, thank you. Mm-hmm. And so he stomps on Galactus's herald, and that doesn't please Galactus. Galactus, of course, as you know, has this long obsession with consuming the Earth and destroying it. It's been like on his hit parade for a long time, but he's constantly confounded by the Fantastic Four. And so Galactus arrives after the Sphinx has completed his quest. He's absorbed all that knowledge. He's got the Ka stone. He's basically, in his own mind, he's become a god, and he's claiming Earth for himself. Galactus shows up and says, I'm finally here to consume the Earth. And that sets the showdown between Sphinx and Galactus, because Sphinx wants the Earth for himself. Galactus has come to consume the Earth. And, of course, the Fantastic Four, at this point, have been subjected, I believe, by the Skrulls.
Yes.
To an aging ray, and they are dying, except for Johnny Storm, who was not subjected to the ray. Reed Richards, the Invisible Girl, and the Thing are all dying of old age, and so they're too feeble to get into the fight, really. They're busy with the Herald, but their powers are weakened.
Yeah, one addition to the backstory here. The Fantastic Four actually summon Galactus. They have to go find Galactus because they need him to beat the Sphinx, because they think the Sphinx is too powerful for them to be. So they actually bring Galactus in, and Reed Richards says, hey, I will, if you beat Galactus, I will do away with that agreement we had where I said you couldn't target Earth anymore. So he has to make a deal with the devil. So Galactus comes back to beat the Sphinx. So that adds a little layer here. And that Herald you mentioned, the new Herald for Galactus is a guy named Terrax the Tamer. Mike Gale, do you know a lot about Terrax the Tamer?
Not much, to be honest. No. Only I've seen random issues of FF with him, but that's about it.
His first appearance was fantastic. 211 was when he first showed up, Miles, right?
Yeah, he was a longtime herald of Galactus who was he was a petty. He was like a warlord on his own planet. He ran a planet, and he was just like a debaucherous guy who sat around with a harem. And Galactus turned him into one of his heralds, and eventually they had quite a long series of sort of interludes with Terrax the Tamer. He eventually gets fired by Galactus for failing him, I think. And he becomes obsessed with revenge, and then Dr. Doom decides to use him for some scheme to destroy the Fantastic Four. And so I believe Dr. Doom ends up killing him by virtue of he removes some of the controls on the cosmic power that Galactus gave him. So I think he ends up getting consumed by his own power and destroyed eventually. But he had a long run.
Yeah, this is right at the beginning of his days as a Herald. His real name is Tyros, and he controlled the moon Birj, B-I-R-J, of the planet Marman. So if you're scoring at home, the moon Birj and the planet Marman. But his deal, like Miles said, he's a real debaucherous dude, and that's what Galactus wanted as a Herald. Because he goes, hey, I made some mistakes in the past with that Norrin Rad guy. He had morals. He had ethics. I want a dirty, rotten scoundrel to be my Herald. And so he wanted to get this Tyros guy. And I guess Tyros had limited ability to control rock, so that was like the basis of his powers that Galactus gave him. He turned him into like a living rock, and he can manipulate the earth and all, and land and all that stuff. Now, he was created by Marv Wolfman and John Byrne, who are the creative team behind this issue we're doing here today. Now, Mike L., Terrax was Galactus's fourth Herald. Can you name the previous three?
I'm just going to guess here. Silver Surfer.
Correct. He's number one.
Does the Punisher count? Wasn't he one of them? Of the robot Punisher? No, I'm serious. There was a robot
I have no
Punisher.
idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. He was...
No, he does not count.
Okay,
we want living dudes, living people.
I know that Nova was one, but she was after this.
Yes, she was after this.
Sun. Oh, what's his name? Sun something. He's like made of fire. No.
You're correct with the fire stuff.
Yeah. What was his name?
Fire Lord.
Fire Lord. Okay, and then
he was the third, so we're missing number two.
I'm missing number two. Ugh. You know what? I give up. Who was it?
Miles Watson. Any ideas?
No, the only ones that I can remember besides Tyrax, Silver Surfer, and I remember the Dream one where Spider-Man's aunt becomes Golden Oldie. But that
was What If. That was What If. Or no, that was the assistant editor's issue, right?
Yes, it was. Yep.
Yeah. Well, the other one we're looking for is a fellow named Gabriel. I have no recollection of Gabriel at all. And I guess the gimmick was that Silver Surfer represented the sea, like water. Gabriel represented air. Fire Lord was fire, so Terex is now earth, like the four elements. Huh. So there you go. There's your Galactus Herald update. We already talked about the Sphinx, and he was also created by Marv Wolfman and Saab Buscema, so Wolfman's the writer here. I'm guessing that's why he brought the Sphinx in. Also appearing in this issue is a fellow named H.E.R.B.I.
Yeah.
Michael, do you know what H.E.R.B.I stands for?
Oh, I do not.
Highly engineered robot built for interdimensional exploration. H.E.R.B.I. And he's a little robot. And his origin dates back to the Fantastic Four cartoon from 1978. That's where he first appeared. Would you like to explain this, Michael?
Well, there is an urban myth that they didn't want to use the Human Torch because they were afraid that kids would set themselves on fire. But the truth is that the Human Torch was optioned for either another show or a movie or something.
Yeah, so they optioned them out to Universal Studios to make live action a film or a TV show.
Right. Yeah, so they couldn't use him, and so instead they came up with H.E.R.B.I, and he became the fourth member of the Fantastic Four. And I believe he was designed by Jack Kirby.
Correct, and he was named by Stan Lee.
Oh, cool.
Miles, do you remember H.E.R.B.I from those cartoons?
When I saw him flying around in the
I think we lost you there, Miles.
I'm not a fan.
Oh, not a fan of H.E.R.B.I. Michael, how do you feel about H.E.R.B.I?
I love
He's a
H.E.R.B.I.
little robot. He's a little robot.
I think he should be like a permanent member of the team, like the fifth member, you know?
Yeah, Herbie.
He just gives it that like classic feel to it, like it fits in with like the retro sci-fi
kind of feel, yeah. Because that's when Fantastic Four is at its best, when it's a sci-fi, full-on sci-fi
totally
thing.
Yep.
Wolfman and Byrne were the ones who brought H.E.R.B.I. into the comic book, and his first appearance was issue 209.
Cool.
So, still early. And unbeknownst to the Fantastic Four, in this issue, Herbie's actually under the control of an evil guy named Dr. Sun or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But they don't know that yet. Another guy who shows up in this issue is the Watcher.
That's right.
The Watcher.
Uatu. Yep.
Yeah, his first appearance was Fantastic Four 13, 1963, created by Lee and Kirby. Mike L., tell us who the Watcher is.
Well, he is part of it's Uatu. He's part of the race of Watchers. The Watchers, basically, their role is to just observe, the universe as things unfold and kind of keep track of things. And one of their credo is that they're not supposed to interfere in anything. But basically, every 5 minutes, Uatu is interfering in issues of the Fantastic Four whenever he feels like it, including this one.
Yes. He becomes very active in this.
Right.
Miles, do you have any Watcher memories as a child?
My main thing with the Watcher was that he was one of those people that his big thing was I can't interfere, right?
Yeah.
He was always saying that he couldn't interfere. And yet,
he always interfered.
as we will discover, every time he was in a story, he interfered.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
In fact, the Watcher was a previous guest on this show when we did the Conan and Thor What If.
Oh, that's right.
And that's
right.
Probably the only comic that I can think of that I remember the Watcher being in where he didn't interfere with something and he just says, hey, check this out. This is like an alternate history.
Basically, I'm kind of like the Watcher. I watch a lot of TV. I don't leave my house. I don't interfere in people's lives. Just do what I'm doing. There you go. All right, so that brings us to the issue itself. 40 cents. We're still in the 40 cents there. 213. Michael, let's look at the cover.
Well, we got that classic Marvel ribbon across the top, Marvel Comics Group, right?
Yep.
That signals that it's good. We got the world's greatest comic magazine. We got not the classic logo, but I guess this is like the middle 70s logo, right?
I like this, though.
Oh, me too. Yeah, me too. And then we got the four faces. I believe these are John Buscema. These four faces, they're just perfect. Or maybe they're...
Looks like more like John Romita Sr. to me.
Could be. Yeah, you could be right. Yeah, you're probably right. Because he was also the artist for a few issues there, like after Kirby left, so you're probably right.
But, so we got the little four faces and little circles around the main logo. Right. And I like it. It's a good look.
It's a very nice design, yep.
So there's no corner box under the price, like their faces are right in the logo. Miles, how do you feel about this logo?
I like it.
You sound underwhelmed, Miles. I expected more excitement.
Well, I'm not gonna lie. Okay. I'm contrasting the 212 and 213 covers, and it's acceptable.
It's acceptable. I like the little circle faces. Though. It's a good look. All right, so Michael,
it's the classic look of the Fantastic Four. I mean, always having those faces up at the top. It was fun. I never approved of the way the Invisible Girl was done in the bubble heads, as I called them as a kid. I thought the Thing was well done. I thought Johnny Storm was well done. But if you look at her, there's just something wrong with that face.
I guess a little bit.
Oh, I don't mind it at all.
Yeah. But hey, Miles, what you don't want to do is go read John Byrne's later work with Fantastic Four, like around issues 280 or something. He gives Sue Storm a mullet, a full-on mullet.
I know that haircut. I remember that well. I even remember the issue where she got it.
She looks terrible.
That was a very 80s thing. It was like that pop star look where they had like the spiked hair on top with it was kind of a mullet. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a very popular look at a certain point in the 80s with like a pop star woman singer look.
Yeah, it was terrible. All right, so Mike, what else? What do we got going on in the cover in terms of the action?
So we've got Terex attacking with his axe. He's attacking an aged Mr. Fantastic, who's got like white hair and wrinkles, and then we got Ben Grimm, the Thing, running towards Terrax in the background, and we got Human Torch flying around behind all of them, and then we've got like this futuristic Kirby machinery all around them, and like looks like they're in outer space.
Yeah, it's a pretty good cover.
Yeah, it's pretty good, but it's funny because I do think John Byrne draws a good thing, but this is not a great thing in my opinion.
I think he's trying to imply that he's like older, but I don't know if that works. Like.
Not quite, no.
I think because throughout this whole issue, even though the thing's supposedly aging, you really can't tell. It would have been better if they made him like skinny and like hunched over.
Right, or something, yeah.
But also on the cover at the bottom says "To the Death."
Right.
So it's a great cover, but Miles, going back to what we were talking about before, probably be an even better cover if we saw Galactus and Sphinx punching each other. I don't know.
Yeah, they should have reversed this. In all honesty, they should have done the teaser for this fight on the last issue, and they should have done the previous issue's cover on this one, which shows the Galactus and the Sphinx squaring off. I would like to interject that the Thing's age makeup, so to speak, his look on the cover of 212 is much better.
That's drawn by Walt Simonson, that cover. 12.
What do you think of that mouth, though? The Thing's mouth on 212. It looks like a bit like a sphincter to me, like an anal sphincter.
I was going to say a withered up old donut, but whatever you are.
But yeah, it's a good cover.
Yeah, it's Walt Simonson. This cover is, like we said, John Byrne. All right, so Michael, we get into the issue, the big splash page. Michael, how about reading those yellow boxes at the top, the explanations A? Because how do you feel about this?
Sure, why not?
Miles and I will discuss this gimmick when we're done.
So here we go. Explanations. A. The world-devouring Galactus is about to engage in a winner-take-all struggle with the power-mad Sphinx. The prize, the Earth itself. B. Reed Richards, his wife Sue, and the orange-skinned Ben Grimm are rapidly aging, the results of the Skrull's metabolic booster. C. Terrax, powerful new Herald of Galactus, confronts the remaining members of the Fantastic Four aboard Galactus' starship. His object, their total annihilation. D. And that's just on page 1. For the rest of the story, keep on turning.
Yes. So, Miles, as a writer, how do you feel about such an introduction to a story?
Well, I think you have two choices when it comes to this sort of like bombastic narration that they do. You can either swallow it whole or puke it up.
Yes.
And I get it because this was a fairly deep story arc that was now being resolved. So they had to do it some way. You know what I mean? Like, you only have a limited amount of space, and
I guess I just wasn't a fan of the explanations A, B, C, D. Like, I think there would have been
it's on the nose. It's
a smoother way to do it. I think they could have tried a little harder.
Like, I think it's a mistake as a writer, to draw attention to your actual technique, like calling a chapter foreshadowing.
Right.
It's a mistake to do that. I think that's a bit on the nose, even for a comic book.
And they do that a lot around this time. They'll have like fade to black, fade out, interlude, and they do it a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So the splash page itself, it's like an overhead shot. Things in the middle. Human Torch behind him. Reed Richards, looking all old, is working on a computer, and we see the back of Terrax coming into the bottom of the frame.
And again, the Thing just looks like a big guy with like orange lines, like black lines drawn on orange skin. He doesn't really look like the Thing there.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah. And then I love this dialogue. Torchy, Stretcho, we got company.
Classic Thing dialogue. Yeah.
Right. Those Marvel nicknames for each other, right? Anyway.
Of course, then we get the next panel, the next page. He's punching Terrax in the chest.
Walk.
Huh? My snazziest punch. And you ain't even blinking. What gives? And now, Miles, you said you loved the Thing. Was that part of his charm, that he was just like a brawler from the streets? Yancey Street?
The thing that I loved about the Thing was that he was this crude beer drinking. He had those giant cigars he smoked. And he talked just like a beer drinking brawler from like a bar, and he also narrated everything he did as he fought, which is ridiculous, but I liked it because he often was dismayed when people could take his punches, just like here, you know. He would talk about his Sunday punch, which was like
that's right, his Sunday punch. And it's clobbering time.
Yes.
so
yeah,
Terex starts fighting back and just
fuck. Yeah, just hits him in the chin. And then Mr. Huh?
He screams "dolt" at him. And that's
right.
That's right. Dolt. Calls him a dolt. Yeah, I want to talk about Terrax's voice here in a minute, but so he knocks the thing back, and then Reed Richards wraps him up, Michael.
Right. And then, but then Terrax, what does he do? Does he zap him?
I think he's just strong.
Okay. Yeah, and then what's his name? Human Torch comes in and he tries to get in on the action. But then in the background, we see, well, actually in the foreground, we see H.E.R.B.I.E, the robot. He's up to something here, but we don't know what it is yet. But we see him grabbing some, these metal doohickeys, and then just basically, instead of helping in this fight, he just takes off, leaves. It's mission unknown.
Before we get to the next page, though, I want to talk about Terex's voice. Like in the fourth panel, he's like punching Reed or whatever the hell he's doing to Reed. We get the great sound effect spadook or spadok.
Yeah.
But he says, "I still owe you for the humbling me before my people." Yeah, because in the previous issue, the Fantastic Four, like when he was still Tyros in issue 211, I guess, the Fantastic Four came in and like beat him down and handed him over to Galactus because so he's still mad about that. So that's why he's here to get revenge against the Fantastic Four. But he says, "And I mean to pay you back for that deed in spades." Now, Miles, he grew up on he used to control a moon called Burge from the planet Manmar or whatever the hell it was. Do you think they played a lot of bridge on Burge?
That line, even as a kid, I think it was almost as if the guy who was writing it was like the first three panels are written by one guy and then he leaves the room and another one comes in, or maybe he forgot which, because that's like something that the Thing might say. He'd be like, "I'm going to beat your behind," and, like,
yeah,
right.
He might say, "I'm going to pay you back in spades." Tyrax, no.
Yeah, see, that's what when you hear people talk about a character's voice, when you're, it's the words they choose, the references they make, the comparisons they make. Those are all little things you can do to shape a character's voice. Terex would never say in spades because he has no concept of bridge. He can't say that. So, yeah, not so good. All right. So after H.E.R.B.I.E leaves, we jump on to the next page, and here we go, the main event. It looks like, right, Mike?
And I gotta say, I don't remember if they used this visual in Nova, but I love this visual of the pyramids all floating and like the Egyptian architecture in the background. That's just amazing. And then so anyway, and I guess the readers can't, or the listeners can't see it, but I should tell them what's going on. But basically, the Sphinx and Galactus are standing facing each other like they're in a wrestling ring about to fight, and they're gigantic. And as we said, there's these floating pyramids in the background, and it looks like they're in like ancient Egypt or something.
Yes.
And they're basically just having words with each other, and
they're trash talking before the fight.
Right. And then basically after a page of trash talking, they do start to fight.
Yes.
And basically Galactus, blasts him with whatever his power is called, Bakum. And then Sphinx shoots him with his eyes, Foom. Yeah. And then Galactus, I guess this is silent because then he shoots him again, but there's no sound effect. But then when Sphinx gets hit, it goes Thok.
Yeah, Thok.
So anyway, there's a lot of fighting.
That's a good panel, though. I like that panel of him getting hit, Thok.
Yeah,
that's a classic. That's a classic, like Kirby Marvel panel there, like.
Right.
Because I thought a lot. We'll talk about the art later, but I was underwhelmed with a lot of it from Byrne. But,
me too. We'll talk. Yeah, we'll definitely have a lot to say about that. Yeah. But yeah, it's basically a lot of fighting and a lot of talking, right?
Yeah.
That's basically it. Of course.
Now, Miles, we always get here on the Flea Market Fantasy. I always like when people get punched. And Mike L. never likes the violence. He's never a fan of the violence. But I think you're a man after my own heart, right, Miles? You like the punching, right?
Oh, I do like a good punch.
Yeah. So it's a pretty fun fight to watch the giant Sphinx going up against Galactus.
I found this interesting because this battle, not to be too generalized, but it starts with them using all their blast powers, right? And their psychic powers. He's using the Ka stone. The Sphinx is using his green, sort of like Superman heat vision there because it's green.
That's Galactus shooting the green. Yeah.
And then it turns into a bit of a brawl.
Yeah, because the Sphinx eats away the Earth beneath Galactus, so he thinks he buried him in the center of the Earth or whatever. Galactus pops up out of the ground behind him, grabs him by the ankles, and just starts slamming him around.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah, it looks like he slaps him here, eh?
Yeah,
the bottom of the next page.
He pimp slaps him, and and look, the Sphinx's costume explodes.
Right, that's how hard he hit him. Yep.
Yeah, he hit so hard that his clothes come off, which is kind of interesting.
And we got the Kirby crackle around his right hand too. Boom. You better have all my money, Sphinx. Bang. And his shirt just
my money, not half.
all my cash, and his shirt just explodes. Oh. So then we cut back to the Fantastic Four fighting Terrax, and Thing. He doesn't look too old here. He's smacking him good. Thack-a-boom.
Thack-a-boom, yep. And again, a big reaction from Terrax as he's getting hit in the jaw. And then what's his name? Johnny comes in, and then finally, Mr. Fantastic joins the fray again, and he's looking pretty terrible.
Yeah, he's looking old.
Pretty old and decrepit, right?
Yep.
Yeah, he looks
old. And then we cut back over to his little secret plan with H.E.R.B.I. there. And he's like, H.E.R.B.I, what are you doing here? You were supposed to stay with us. Sorry, sir. I was completing work on this device you began. I thought, there's no time for that. I need you now. So then he's like, yeah, use your grappling hooks. Carry Ben back to the Baxter building before it's too late. And then meanwhile, Human Torch is still fighting Terrax. And this is actually cool. I like when they do this. Like, Human Torch kind of uses his powers against them. Well, not really, but he basically gets Terrax to absorb all his heat. Then he burns, what is this here? It's a temperature control unit, and he basically melts it so that it just shoots out all this, what is it?
Liquid oxygen.
Liquid oxygen, right. And it basically just hardens all around him, which is cool.
Yeah, it's really cold. So, and we mentioned Terex is like a rock, so he's absorbing all that heat. Now he turns really cold. I think my problem with it would be when Terrax is getting hit with all that stuff. Doesn't he say something like, I'm getting covered in ice, or what is it?
Of course, yeah. He's like, what? You shattered the temperature control units. Ice is pouring over me. Yeah, that's bad. That's bad.
The second line, it wouldn't have been awful if he just said, what? You shattered the temperature control units. That would have been bad, but serviceable. When he goes, ice is pouring over me, I'm like, dude, this isn't radio.
Exactly.
It's a visual medium. We can see. But yeah, so he freezes them. I'm sorry, he freezes them and Terex passes out. So what else did you want to say, Mouse?
I was just, I mean, as you know, Mike Dell, I'm a big fan of old-time radio, and I'm always amused at the very clever way that they were able to visualize things like, you're choking me,
Yeah.
Because you don't need to say you're choking me on television because it's obvious, dumbass, you're being choked. But here you have a totally visual medium, comic books with no sound, and he feels compelled to say ice is pouring over me in a panel where literally almost all we can see is ice pouring over him. But whatever.
Hey, Miles, by the way, at the moment, I'm listening to a lot of yours truly, Johnny Dollar, the old radio.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Well,
anyway.
that sarcastic humor in that show is very much up your alley.
Yeah, yours truly, Johnny Dollar. Come on, Mike Hill doesn't listen to old-time radio. You're missing the boat, Mike Hill.
No, I don't, unfortunately. Nope.
All right, so now that the Human Torch has defeated Terrax, he flies over to check on reading them, but we cut again, and we go back to Galactus and Sphinx. Now they're just duking it out, throwing hands.
Yep.
Love it.
And Yeah, as we said, Sphinx's costume is all battered up, so those big spike mask things he had on his face are kind of knocked off, and by the bottom of the page, he's like almost got nothing left at the top, right? His shirt is half ripped.
Yeah, and he's bald. I
Right.
like Galactus here. Miles, how about Galactus hitting him with the left cross? He's like, I am the power. I am the all. Look at Galactus.
I
What a
love
beast.
Galactus' dialogue because it's so megalomaniacal, like self-deifying. But then at the end, as we'll see, he walks it back a little about himself being all-powerful, which is kind of funny. But this left that he lands, I think I have more issues than I would have expected with the art of this issue. But I really like the way that is drawn. The way he's landing that gigantically magical, whatever the hell that red black inferno.
Kirby Crackle,
Yeah,
we like to call it. Kirby Crackle.
Yeah, they're grappling and he lands that tremendous left, and at that point, you can see the Sphinx is just about done.
Yep. Yeah, he got dropped, and then Galactus goes over, grabs the Sphinx by the hands, like a test of strength kind of deal, and the Sphinx is yelling in pain. And then we cut again to H.E.R.B.I. flying over, and he's delivering the thing to the Baxter building, where he puts him in like a cryogenic tube, I guess, next to Sue Storm, or Sue Richards, I guess she's married now. So I guess they're trying to preserve them, Michael, right?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. He's in suspended animation, and he just takes off. And then we cut back, yeah.
Galactus and Sphinx again. And Galactus absorbs all his powers, Michael, and says Sphinx is little again. He's back being a little guy.
Normal-sized guy now, yeah. And then he grabs this, what is this thing? His
the Ka Stone, K-A,
right.
Ka.
Okay, and then he grabs it and just crushes it, and then lets it fall through his hands like sand. And then we see Sage, who we saw in Nova, right? Number 6 or whatever?
Yeah.
Sage is back.
Yeah, so he crushed, because for those who don't remember, the Ka Stone is what gives not only the Sphinx all his power, but it's also what makes him immortal. So he crushes the stone.
Right.
So Sage is like the, like actually a sage, except they spell it with a Y. But it's a mystical being who can like see the future. And whenever Miles, we cracked up about this in the Nova issue, but whenever Sphinx looks into Sage's face, he like recoils in horror. And it was pretty funny back then because it's like, oh, he's just really ugly. But no, he sees his fate. He can see his fate, so he refuses to look in Sage. So he's still scared here. But what does Galactus do, Michael?
He, this is great. He basically curses him to go back to the point where before he became Terrax, like 5,000 years ago.
Before he became the Sphinx.
Or before he became the Sphinx. And to relive the next 5,000 years as an immortal. And then when he gets to the end of that, he's going to go back to the beginning again. So basically he's going to live forever, repeating his torture time and time again throughout all eternity.
Yeah, put him in a big old time loop.
About this is that if you look back to the banter at the beginning when he and Galactus are squaring off, Sphinx, who's been insane up to this point, becomes lucid at the end, and he starts saying, you know, how many times have we fought this contest? How many times have I looked into your eyes? You know, this time the vicious circle will be broken. And Galactus keeps saying, I don't know what you're talking about. You're speaking in riddles, which is, of course, a pun, riddle of the Sphinx. But we find out at the end of the battle that Galactus, who doesn't know that this has been endlessly repeated, now causes it to become endlessly repeated.
Yeah, that's actually really good. Yeah.
So it's really clever writing. And as a kid, I didn't understand the beginning and the end. As a little kid, I didn't understand why the Sphinx was talking that way. But then at the end, you realize that the Sphinx has done this over and over again at this point in existence. He's caught in a causality loop or whatever it's called. And the Galactus doesn't know that he's going to do this. But then at the end, he does it and he initiates this loop.
Yeah, it's pretty
Very
good.
cool.
Yeah, I think Marv Wolfman, he's good with the big ideas, but the dialogue, not so much.
Yeah, I agree, yeah.
So Galactus is talking to Sage, and they explain what they did. And then Galactus says, huh? And he looks over, and there's Charles Xavier. No, I'm sorry, it's the Watcher.
Right.
The Watcher. That first panel of the Watcher's not so good.
No, it's not great.
His head's wee little there.
He looks like Marlon Brando.
Yeah.
Right.
He needs to have a big old cranium, but not in that picture. But so yeah, the Watcher, as always, getting involved.
Yep.
What a dick.
And he even addresses the fact that he's not going to get involved, and he still gets involved.
Yes.
And then out of nowhere, here comes Human Torch and Mr. Fantastic, and Mr. Fantastic is supposedly carrying the Ultimate Nullifier. Now, I do have to point out, this looks nothing like the Ultimate Nullifier from Fantastic Four number 50. So I don't know why or how Galactus recognizes it. But
yeah, the Ultimate Nullifier is a weapon that can defeat the Galactus. They stole it off his ship, and it's the only thing in the universe that can beat Galactus. And the original version of it, Mike, it was like a little handheld thing, right?
Yeah, and I can't even describe what it looked like. It didn't look like a gun. It looked like almost the closest thing would be like a round staple gun, but not really. Yeah,
kind of. Yeah, it's pretty good. Kind of like a staple gun. Yeah, and but this thing here looks like a cannon of some sort, like a handheld cannon.
Right.
Different. But Galactus, as soon as he sees it, he's like, "Oh, the Ultimate Nullifier. What?"
Yeah, he's like, "Where did you get it?" He's like, "From from your ship, Galactus. I reconstructed the weapon from your own machinery." He's like, "Oh, so be it." He's like, "Thus ends the threat of this." Oh, wait. No, I'm on the wrong page. He's like, "Thus." He still says "thus." Thus at last does your human treachery bear itself. So basically, yeah, he's talking about what happened last issue when he's like, when you first revoked the pledge you once made me speak, I waited to learn how you would prevent my ravaging of your world. Perhaps I granted you too much ingenuity, human, but you cannot believe that I will accept your word as to your nullifier's power. But basically, he just does. He's like, okay, well, I guess I'll take off then.
Yeah, he doesn't want to call his bluff because this is the one thing in the universe that could kill him. So he doesn't want to call the bluff. And then when Galactus leaves, Reed drops the gun, and it's just it's just fake.
It's junk.
Just falls apart.
Yep.
And then Human Torch is talking to the Watcher, and again the Watcher gets involved here because Galactus is trying to read Reed Richards' mind to tell if he's telling the truth or not, and the Watcher was interfering with that.
Yes, just by being there, he's like, my constant probing created an interference Galactus could not penetrate. And then Human Torch is like, but I thought you could interfere. I did my duty, nothing more, nothing less. The events brewing were of such cosmic importance that my presence was demanded. To fully comprehend those events, I deemed it necessary to follow all that occurred through the eyes of one of the participants. If my probing prevented Galactus from doing the same, that was not interference. So yeah.
His probing. You never want to be probed by the Watcher. He won't be walking the same. All right,
He doesn't interfere.
It doesn't interfere. So then Human Torch is like, all right, hey, Reed, we won. And then he turns around, there's Reed all old and stuff, and he collapses dead. And then look at that final panel. Johnny Storm on his knees, holding Reed in his arms, and Reed's all like wobbly and elastic and elongated. And he says, Reed! And then real quiet, he says, Reed. Do you think we need that second Reed? I think that first Reed's all we need. Yeah.
Well, first one could be shock, and the second one is kind of like acceptance. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know.
And it says next issue, and then there was one.
Yeah, Johnny Storm, the only one left.
Yep. They're all dead.
Miles, how do you feel about that ending, Miles?
It's the classic pulling the rug out from a victory. They've managed to crush the Sphinx, who was the bane of their existence for a number of issues and was getting more and more powerful, and defeated them several times. I remember in the issue where the Sphinx sucks the computer dry and goes insane with power and becomes kind of what he thinks is a god. That's like the low point, where they have to reach out to Galactus, their worst enemy, really. Yeah. And now they've managed to defeat the Sphinx and then foil Galactus. But they all drop basically dead. And the dumbass of the group, Johnny Storm, is now the one who's got to save the day. And of course, that's like if you've ever had that coworker, you couldn't trust to even go on the donut run.
That's Johnny Storm.
Johnny Storm. He's a moron. And the Fantastic Four fate is in his hands. Pretty strong negative ending.
Yeah, because on his way back to the Baxter building, he's going to start chasing skirts and drinking booze and having a party. And it's like, oh, wait, I was supposed to save everybody. Yeah, my fault.
Yeah.
My bad.
He can't do it. He's a loser. They die in the next issue, and Fantastic Four ended after.
Yeah, it ended in issue 214. That's it. The whole series ended because they all died. But this is a good little hook for the next issue, right? Little Miles Watson was probably counting the days until he could go to the drugstore to get the next one.
I was, but I was also somewhat exhausted because this was. People forget that the story arcs, they took a lot out of you if you were a hardcore comic book fan. You wait so long, and then to see the Sphinx crushed like this after they built him up as this gigantic opponent, and then, that was the interesting thing about Marvel was, no matter how strong a character was, like Thor, then you had a character like the Hulk, right? The Thing was strong, but then you had the Hulk. Well, then you get the Sphinx, but you also got Galactus. Like, there's always somebody else in the deck that's going to come along and basically make the strong character look impotent and weak. So it was exhausting to see Galactus come in and he crushes the Sphinx, and then he leaves, and these guys, they're old because the Skrulls gave them the aging ray. And yeah, I mean, this was a pretty intense story arc as they went.
Yeah, I gotta say, like Marv Wolfman, we've talked about him a lot on here. And Miles, I'm pretty sure Marv Wolfman wrote that werewolf story we did too.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Yeah. But he wrote issues 190 and then 195 to 215 of Fantastic Four. So that's a pretty good run there, 195 to 215. And that's from 78 to 80. Like Mike L, he's doing a lot here. Like Miles was saying about the story arc. Like that scroll making him old, usually that's enough. That's all you need for a story. But that's just an underlying subplot of a much larger story going on with Galactus and Sphinx,
Right,
right. So that's pretty impressive. Mm-hmm. I like how he's putting all those threads into one story.
Yeah, he's a solid writer, for sure.
I would say that he comes to the brink of overloading it with so much stuff, but I actually feel like this kind of overflowing story, it's full of vitality. I mean, whether or not you like his dialogue or the art, there's a lot of vitality to this. It's overflowing. There's like this fulsome quality to it. Like some comics, especially standalone stories, they tend to be a little bit on the empty side as far as new ideas or, whatever it is that's going to hook you in. But as a storyline went, this was pretty complicated. It involved a lot of people, the Skrulls, Galactus, the Sphinx, Fantastic Four, various others. And it was there's a great deal of I don't want to overuse the word, but I feel like there was a lot of energy and a lot of ideas in here. It's sort of overflowing quality to it that I like.
Yeah, because you also get the introduction of Terrax and his backstory and his plot of getting revenge against Fantastic Four. And then we also have H.E.R.B.I, who we don't know at the moment, but he's actually under the control of another villain, which will come into play, I think, around issue 217. So yeah, he really did a good job of planting all these seeds and linking them all together. So that's impressive. His dialogue, though, and like the narration throughout the book, not a fan of. But
I did enjoy Galactus's like megalomaniacal
that was
tension.
I liked when Galactus was talking like, I am the power, I am the one, or whatever. That stuff was cool. But I thought some of Galactus's earlier stuff. Now, Michael, I didn't really read a lot of Galactus growing up. Like, did he always talk like this in the early Lee Kirby stuff?
From my foggy memory, pretty much. I think so, yeah.
Like, I just always have the impression of him being very, sparse with his words. Not very, rarely talked. He only talked when it was important. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Like, I think the specific bubbles you're talking about when he's like, when he's kind of bragging, he's definitely never really been like that before.
Yeah, it seemed a little weird. But
yeah.
All right. What else about the writing, Michael? Anything you'd like to point out?
The writing, not much. I mean, we've read quite a few Marv Wolfman stories, and they're never great. They're never spectacular, you know. So
yeah, I think he does a lot of good here in terms of plotting, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I meant with what I said earlier. Is I think some people, some creative people, and Mike Dell, I'm sure you're familiar with this, as a writer, you know, and as an editor especially, and as a reader, there are people who are full of that vitality that I was referring to, that kind of gushing creativity and overflowing. I'm using that word a lot, but that's the visual image I have of these people who are just fountains of kind of creativity, and at the same time, their execution is often very much lagging. No, we haven't gotten to the art yet, but I feel like between the art, the dialogue is over the top. The art is, you know, we'll get there in a minute, but like I feel as if the motive force behind this storyline is this very powerful, complex supernova of different ideas, like a fireworks display, bang, 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 bang. But at the same time, you've got issues with execution. And I noticed this even in that vampire werewolf. What was that comic called? I'm sorry.
Werewolf by Night.
Oh, right, yeah.
That there were some interesting ideas and so forth, but it was a sloppy execution with a really bad ending. And
yeah.
I feel like there are guys who are just basically idea men, and they can hit you with ideas almost all day like a deck of cards, just one after the other after the other. But when it comes to fully executing the ideas, that's where you see the breakdown.
Yeah, I think that is actually a good description of a lot of these early creators, right? This era creators like Jerry Conway and Marv Wolfman.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So, all right, let's get to the art. John Byrne, he drew issues. We've talked about him many times on the show, but he drew issues 209 to 218. And then he came back and he wrote and drew the Fantastic Four issues 220, 221, and then from 232 to 294. So that's a hell of a run.
Yep.
Man. Now, Michael, you read some of those, right?
I read all of them. I collected them all over the course of 5 years. Like, I'd read scattered issues, and then it took like 5 years to collect them all. Then I finally sat down to read them, and they were terrible. So I immediately sold them.
That's a recurring theme on the show, Miles. Mike L. would collect all these books. He wouldn't read them. He'd collect them. And then when he was finished collecting them, he'd sit down and read them, realize they're all terrible, and then sell them.
That's true.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
That is very much like something I would do.
Yeah.
So John Byrne, as we mentioned on the show previously, I love John Byrne when he's doing X-Men.
Yeah.
But that was clearly the peak of his artistic powers, I would say. And then it seems like he spread himself thin over the years, doing too much, and his art really suffered. Like if you look, we will get into this art in a minute, but like I was just flipping through because I was impressed at that run on Fantastic Four. Mm-hmm. So I looked at some of those early 230 issues, and the art I think is really good, easily recognizable as John Byrne. And then you go to like issues 280, 290, it's really bad. Like really.
Yeah. Well, I think what happened is like we'll talk about this art in a minute, but here he's being inked by Joe Sinnott. And then when he takes over, I'm not sure who's inking him, but after a while he starts inking himself. And then he starts going directly to inks without even pencil.
You know what? You could kind of tell because the way the characters are looking, you could kind of tell that he was just doing it. Yeah, that's interesting.
Right. It just becomes really sloppy. And like, I don't know, he just became obsessed. And probably because he was trying to draw like 3 comics a month, he became obsessed with like cutting corners, you know, and like eliminating backgrounds. And, you know, then he was like, oh, well, I'll fill in all the word bubbles so that I don't have to draw all the parts where the word bubbles are. You know what I mean? Like, he's just lazy. I don't know.
Yeah. And I remember he had that problem, that Alpha Flight issue we did. You could tell he was cutting corners and backgrounds. And, But Miles,
honestly, this art. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to ask Miles if he has any. Like, I know you say you don't really know much about the artists in these books, but do you know who John Byrne is? Do you have a history of John Byrne at all?
I'll be honest, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. And the funny thing is that I know that a lot of times when you guys are talking about art, I have seen the art of the people you've been talking about many times. It's just that I didn't, and I have to confess this, I was a comic book reader. I was not overly cognizant of the artists who were working or the writers. For whatever reason, as a kid, and even when I was older reading comics, I didn't pay attention to that, and I'm not really sure why, but I didn't. So that's a deficiency, obviously.
When I was a little kid, I wanted to draw comics, so I always paid attention to the artists. So I was always way into it. But yeah, so what do you think of this art, Michael, and this issue specifically?
Honestly, it's not good. Like, I do like John Byrne on X-Men. I like John Byrne on Marvel Team Up and Iron Fist, but this is just doesn't look good. And the thing is Joe Sinnott usually can make anyone's art look good. But to me, this just looks really like second-rate Marvel art, like all the way through. There's a couple good panels.
Yeah, there's a few good panels, but
right.
It seems the big complaint with Byrne is it seems rushed, or like there's a lot of panels. There's nothing here intricate in the panel layout, and that's fine. I kind of like a simple panel layout for pages, but all the camera angles and like the depth of camera, it's always pretty much the same. Like the mid-range shot. And I don't know, it's kind of boring. He could have done a lot better with composition. Now, there are moments where, you see some good stuff, but overall, it's pretty boring and simple art, I would say.
I agree, 100%.
Miles, how did you feel about it?
I have to confess that, as with Batman Special #1, my memory played me false somewhat to the art of this. This is very simplistic art. It does look like the B Team did it. There are some flashes of, I think, real, I don't want to say talent exactly, but there's some interesting spare uses of, like, there's that one thing where you see Galactus just as eyes in a shadow. He's like a...
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
I think it's it's a little nice. There's nice touches. There's touches of cleverness, but there's all this negative space.
Yes, and there's a lot of negative space.
And I know that a lot of people, a lot of artists believe that negative space can have a very strongly artistic quality to it. But I got to be honest, in a comic book, I just generally don't buy that. The page I'm referencing actually is page 15, where he goes, the ultimate nullifier, where he's just a shadow and a hand and those evil eyes. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that actually is like some creativity put into designing the panel,
Yeah, and I did like the image of like the when they're squaring off, you see the Sphinx has reconstructed kind of ancient Egypt in a very dramatic, like a sensationalized way that you can see it as existing within his mind. But the execution of the art, I think Mike L says it best when he says that it's like the B Team. It's tier 2. It's even that the panel that I liked so much as a kid of Sphinx and Galactus squaring off with against the backdrop of those temples and the floating pyramids. I mean, if you look at the pyramids, they're just literally triangles with a black bottom, and then the buildings are okay, but then you've got those rays of light. I don't want to say cartoonish, because that's sort of silly, but it
could have been made to look more impressive, or like I hear what you're saying. It's not really detailed in any way. It's just kind of there.
There's a great use of form in this, but there's just not enough form. There's like, for instance, when the Sphinx is thrown to the ground by Galactus grabbing his ankles, you see the pyramid being torn apart and he's coming up through the ground, and that's not too bad. But then you see stuff like, as they're fighting more and more, it's almost as if, and this applies to the battle with Stony as well, like
Terex.
Storm. You did it, Ben. You made him drop his axe. I mean, it's so simplistic. The art is so sort of, it's very simplistic, and every now and then you get a cool angle, like when the Thing uses the two-fisted attack and hits Stony on the jaw.
Yeah.
That's a nice angle.
Yeah, look at the composition of that panel compared to the others. Like, that's actually like a more of a Marvel type panel with the
and then it's almost as if, like you said, lazy. It's almost as if he's skating, and then there's the one where Johnny has gone Nova and he's blasting Terex with the Nova blast, and at that point, it's embarrassing. That literally looks like something I could draw.
Very simplified. Yep.
Yeah.
It's simplified to the point of just being, I mean, you know, just as there's a difference between childish and childlike, this is like the childish art where you can have art in simplicity, but it's got to be done in a certain kind of way. And by the time you get to the part where Sphinx and Galactus are grappling, if you look at the way they're drawn, they look ridiculous.
Yeah, the first couple.
The proportions are sloppy on the Sphinx. It's very badly drawn, and his body doesn't look right. And then the way the temples look like it was just sketched in a few, like just a real few strokes. Mm-hmm. There's a real sloppiness to some of these panels and an indifference to the way things look. And then he'll spike with like that left hook that he throws, the left cross that he throws that drops him. I mean, that's a nice little piece of art there. But there's just a strange inconsistency. Like he just can't. It's almost like a person who's exhausted and can just make effort like once a page. There's a good panel.
Yeah, and that's what. Because at this time, Michael, at 79, he was still on the X-Men, right?
As far as I know, yeah.
So he was drawing a lot, and you can definitely tell when he's trying and when he's just filling out the page, you know. And like you mentioned that panel of Human Torch going supernova, shooting Terrax. It's just shot. Both characters are fully in the panel. Like it's shot mid-range, camera angle, like I've talked about. It's the same camera angle through a lot of this issue. But now imagine, Michael, if someone said, "Hey, Jack Kirby, we need a panel of Human Torch hitting Terrax with a Nova Blast." Do you think that's what it looks like?
No way.
It would have been, the composition would have been way different. It would have,
and
you know.
And the thing is, Kirby could draw 5 pages a day. And even if he did cut corners, his composition was always flawless, right?
Yeah, he made it interesting to look at, like visually appealing, like just the composition of the panel, where this is just boring and uninspired. And I think that, and again, he's drawn so much. Because he was also doing Avengers around this time too, I think. So, yeah, but you can definitely see when he's putting the effort into a panel and when he isn't. And,
and I got to point out, not only was he drawing X-Men, this was 1 month before the Dark Phoenix saga began. Oh. So the work he was doing on X-Men was stellar. And that leads me to my theory that maybe a lot of that was Terry Austin, right? Feel like putting in so much detail into the inking. Yeah.
Yeah, his best stuff is always done with Terry Austin, no doubt.
Right.
But so yeah, a little inconsistency from Byrne, but it's understandable at this point. This isn't, if it's inconsistent here, it's just, I think it's not out of intent. It's just him being stretched thin with so much work, where later on in his career, he was just cutting corners to make as much money as possible, right? He was just churning out crap just to try and make money.
Yep.
So anyway, all right. So there it is. Miles, anything else about this issue you'd like to mention?
I would like to say that I had forgotten the amount of battle that took place with the Herald. I remembered this more as a contest of Galactus and the Sphinx, with the Fantastic Four sort of impotent in the background due to age. I did remember that Johnny was still viable. I do still like this story very much, and I think it was a big showdown that they this is I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that this is a story that if you take it as a standalone, you're going to have your issues with it and so forth, but taken as the end of an arc, I think it was a pretty satisfying ending to what I thought was a very clever and intense story arc. And I think it makes a little more sense to judge it in context than just alone. But of course, for our purposes, I guess we do have to judge it alone. But I wanted to throw that in there.
That's a good point, though, to make. Yeah. What would you give it 1 out of 10, Miles?
I would give this a 7. I think, or 7.5 maybe. It's the art brings it down somewhat, and there is some silliness, like with Terex getting covered with snow, and I'm being covered with ice. That's hard to forgive, but I enjoyed it. I would give it like a 7.5.
You know what? I'd actually give it a 7 as well, because I know it might be a little high. But I really liked all the plot threads Wolfman had going on here. I liked a lot of punching. I liked the way the Sphinx was defeated. That was clever. And he put him back into time for the old time loop. So I'm going to be favorable here and give it a 7. Although we mentioned Wolfman, the narration stuff is just crazy, and Byrne is inconsistent here. But I still had fun reading it. So a lot of punching. I liked it.
Okay, I can only go as high as a 6. I mean, it's definitely
that's fair.
Fun. Yeah. It reads like a standard, 70s Marvel comic, but I think it's frustrating because I know that the artist and writer can probably do better.
Yeah, I hear you. Byrne can definitely do way better than this, but
right.
It's I still liked a lot of it, and you see two big giant dudes punching each other. Cool
and I think they should have done better given the import of this, because they did They did a great job of taking the Sphinx, who, really was not a big villain, and turning him into a very convincing supervillain, I think, who goes off the deep end and has to be put in check by an even bigger supervillain. He gets too big for his britches. So I think that they really should have done a better job with, just tightening this up, getting better art and getting tighter writing. I think the story deserved better execution, even though I did enjoy it.
So there you go, Fantastic Four 213. Now, Miles, before we say goodbye to you, this is the part of the show that I always dread, but we got to get Mike L's pick for next week.
Oh, yeah, this is my favorite part. So next week, you're going to like this. We're going to go back to Marvel.
Oh,
all right. Marvel comic, yeah. 4-issue miniseries. We're going to read the first issue, and this is Machine Man.
Wow. Machine Man.
Yes. With art by none other than Herb Trimpe and Barry Windsor Smith.
That's a weird combination. That is a weird combination.
It is very weird, and it's written by Tom DeFalco.
So Windsor Smith was just inking Herb Trimpe?
Yes, but it looks basically like Barry Smith drew it. So.
Oh, well, then that'll be
awesome. Good. Yeah, exactly.
What year was this? Machine Man Limited Series. I had.
84.
84. Miles, do you know who Machine Man is?
I don't believe I do.
I just have a vague recollection of him. Doesn't he look like he has like a purple outfit and his arms and legs grow like Stilt Man kind of, right?
Kind of, yeah. They can do many different things. Like at one point, there's a shot of him with like his feet are like connected to wheels. So I think he can do like a bunch of different things, So.
All right, Machine Man next week. So Miles, thanks for joining us, buddy. Appreciate it. And again, go to Amazon.com, 19books.com, buy Cage Life, Knuckle Down, Sinner's Cross, and a bunch of other books he has. He has a bunch of books.
Yes, there is much to choose from and leave scintillating positive reviews about.
Yes, 5 stars all around. 5-star reviews. So thank you, Miles. All right, Mike, I'll wrap it up.
All right, so yeah, we are available on Stitcher, iTunes, and Spotify under Comic Book Syndicate. We're also available under the Comic Book Syndicate Twitter feed and the YouTube channel, as well as Facebook and the Comic Book Syndicate website. Every week we do a different Bronze Age pick. One week I pick, the next week Mike Dell picks. So until next Tuesday, disperse!